c'est bon. Bonjour à tous. Bienvenue pour la conférence qui va être donnée par le professeur Walter Mignolo.
Thank you very much. I mean, technology is wonderful, but at the same time is maybe problematic. J'aurais dû parler en français, mais puisque je ne parle pas français tous les jours, et moi j'écris généralement en anglais et en espagnol, il aurait été un peu difficile de trouver les mots pour les expressions que je dois utiliser dans la conférence. Donc, je m'excuse et je change à l'anglais. So again, thank you very much for, wait a second, I think. Thank you very much for to the organizer for inviting me to this conference. I am sorry not being able to be there. A combination of COVID and a combination of obligation at the university. But I would like to, and I expect to see, to hear, to listen the other intervention, because the program is very exciting. The moment of the conference, the topic of the conference is very timely too. So I am really glad to be part of this. I don't know if what I have to say have much meaning in the context you have already been discussing, but I go ahead and present a few points that I hope I understand that I will talk for 45 minutes, and then we will have plenty of time for conversation, and I will learn also from your participation. So thank you very much to all of this, to all the people who organized that, and I put it on the slide. So my presentation I divided in 3 topics or themes according to the statement and the goal of the conference, and also the specific title that I was suggested to address, which is Planetary Challenges and Opportunity to Review Interdisciplinary African Research. I don't know, you know much better than I what are the opportunities for interdisciplinary research in Africa, but I will talk about the opportunity and the need for interdisciplinary research in the planet. And I will say something in relation to Africa, of course. So the first part is the planetary, perhaps the longest part, but part 2 and 3 will be based on the first part. So the second part is the planetary challenge, the kind of the world order that is changing now, global climate and pandemic, war, etc. And the third part will be the opportunity to renew interdisciplinary research in Africa and in the planet. So let's move then to the first part, the planetary. So then, you are familiar with this, so I just show this map not to tell you anything new, but to make sure that we are in the same page. That one of the narrative is how the Homo sapiens sapien, what, I don't know how many years ago, that depends on 400,000 or 300,000, and kind of spread all over the world. And what is interesting here for me in this talk is that the connection with the Americas and the spread, let's put it that way, into South America, where many cultures, a small organization emerged, but mainly the big civilization that we know today, that is the Inca, Aztecs, and, and Mayas. So the point I want to make here is how many years after the Homo sentient sapien began to spread all over the planet, uh, certain Homo sapiens, sentient sapien, began to map what they knew about the massland and the waterland. So Herodotus, many 5, 6, 7 centuries BC. This map is a reconstruction, of course, but is the base of what in the medieval Western Christianity became the T in O map. This is, as I said, I mean, based on Herodotus. And you see that based on Herodotus, Europe has on top and Asia on the right and Libya or Africa down. But when it came to when the TENO map arrived, so there was a change on the distribution and distribution of in relation to the cardinal points, as we call it today. So Asia was on top because the sun rises there, and Africa on the right and Europe on the left. But the most important feature of this map is that the three known continents at the time, according to the Greek division and the Christian rearticulation, were assigned to the three sons of Noah: Sem to Asia, Japheth, and Sham to Africa. And we know that Sham was a kind of the cursed son of Noah. So Africa was already in the Christian imaginary, something that was separated in somehow, not so Asia, not so much Asia. And Japheth was assigned to Europe, and Japheth is the breadth, the expansion. So by the 14th, the 15th century of the Christian era, there were many civilizations in the planet. I selected 3 or 4, and we can add the kingdom, the so-called kingdom of Africa, Mali, etc. That were very prominent at the time. But I want to just show these 3 let's say maps, but these are maps that are related to cosmology. In the case of the Chinese map, I said map in quotation mark, because map means sort of napkin, but what you kind of draw the design of your surrounding, of your place. But these places are not just on the flat earth. All these places are related to the cosmos. So in the case of China, this is a flat description, but presupposes Tianxia, which is all under heaven. And of course, there was the ruler were at the center, and the farther away you get from the center is what we would call less similar to the way of speaking, the way of living, the knowledge, etc., of the center. That seems to be a common ground of all civilization, of what Karl Jasper called the axial age, more or less 7 centuries BC. But this is kind of late. See, this is an Aztec so-called map. This is a very complicated, but in the center we have Tenochtitlan. We have again the division in four, you see, according to the 4-point cardinal. And this is a kind of a space, but times is also included, because you see here how the kind of the counting of the year and the organization, the communal organization of each of the 4 quadrants. But the space and time doesn't work here very well, because what we have here is places related to distance, related to position, movement of the, because the sun and the planets move around the Earth and at that time. And movement is fundamental. It's movement that articulates what in the West we call space and time. And the Christians have, of course, their own map, and they have the right to have their own map. But their cosmology was was the Christian cosmology. Was a kind of the Christian cosmology already that absorbed the Greek cosmology. The Greek cosmology, there are plenty of goddess and god, but in the Christian map, there is already one map, and the center at that time was Jerusalem. So that's to give you an idea that before 1500, there were many civilizations. Each civilization have its center, is the what this ethno-historian called the Omphalos syndrome. And also we can count in this the map of Al-Idrisi. If you see the original Al-Idrisi, it's very confusing, because you say, what is this? But if you turn Al-Idrisi around, so the south appear in the north, you begin to understand that, oh, this is the Mediterranean, this is Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, oh, this is Africa, oh, this is Asia. But for Al-Idrisi, at the top was the south. So what happened, and this is what happened in 1500, and this is the kind of the great colonial, what we call today the Colonial Revolution. This is Ortelius 1570. So during those 70 years, the navigation across the globe increased, and so the European human being have more information about the water masses and the land masses. The Dutch cartographer was kind of very active at that time. It's all the great maps that we have in the 16th, 17th century are the Dutch cartography. So 2 things happen in this map. I mean, a lot of things happen in the map. I want to just mention 2. One is the Atlantic came to the center, no longer the Mediterranean. That was in the TO map and in the Al-Idrisi map. And the second is that of the 3 previous maps that I show you, only the 3rd one, the Christian, become embedded in the Ortelius map. What I mean is only because the Christian have 3 continents that the 4 continents could be added, and this map be drawn with a division of the 4 major continents. So the big change here is that the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Mare Magnum, the Mediterra is no longer in the center, but it's the Mediterranean that is in the center. At that time, the Mediterranean was the center and Rome was the center of inland. But in the 19th century, the center was displaced to London and to the Greenwich meridian. Now, what the other thing I want to mention is when this Ortelius map was taken to China by the Jesuit Matthew Ricci by 1580, more or less. There is a long process, but through the long kind of process in conversation that I don't have time to go into detail here, but also are not relevant at this point. What happened is that the Chinese wise men of the Ming dynasty appropriated Ortelius map, but made a big change. They put the Pacific in the center and not the Atlantic. Because when Matthew Ricci showed that map to the intellectual of the Ming dynasty, they said, well, this is great, but if China is in the center, why you put it on the upper right corner? So apparently Matthew Ricci went back to the Jesuit mission, redraw the map, 2 or 3 weeks later, invite them again and show this kind of the possibility. And that apparently was accepted. And this is the map that we see today, in the world map that we see today in East Asia. I saw it in Hong Kong, I saw it in Beijing. And probably there is another places where this map, and they told me that this is a standard map. This is an old version, but and the other thing is important here is when you see Ortelius, you have this in the memory, in the kind of the ancestrality, let's put it that way, of Ortelius. But when you see that map, you don't have the Christian Theo map in your memory. What you have is Tianxia and all under heaven. And that, I think, is very important for the planetary challenges today in the kind of the geopolitical conflict and Cold War and war that we are witnessing between the West and China. So I leave that there as a kind of the background. I think it's important for the investigation today, research and investigation, not to start from assuming that the current planetary distribution of 4 or 5 continents, now we add Oceania, and we can add the Antarctica, but still, the 4 basic major continents with the geopolitical, the geopolitical scenario is taking place are still Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas, with the complexity of the North, South, Central American, and the Caribbean. So let's move now to the planetary challenges, the geopolitical planetary challenge, having this background in mind. So let me just a second. Ortelius map and the Chinese version of appropriation of Ortelius map is part of the era that opened up in the 16th century. In Africa, there are 2 moments, according to my understanding. One is the Roman moment, when Alexandria was part of Rome, for example. And then in the 14th century, the Ottoman expansion. But the era that started in 1500, which is the era of changes, in Africa, started in 1652 when the Dutch and the British tried to kind of circumnavigate and go to Asia through the Cape of Good Hope. That for Adam Smith was very important. So why I call this an era of changes? It's an era of changes because that era began to be articulated, what we call modernity, for example. Modernity, not just the modernity from the 16th century, the 18th century, but modernity as le débat des anciens et des modernes, that is already in the 16th century, and is part of the Renaissance. So modernity is a start, I mean, the beginning of this narrative, not the ontological beginning of modernity, because I don't know whether there is no ontological modernity, origin of modernity. Modernity is a macro narrative. So that macro narrative began to be articulated in 1500 with the concept of the new world. So the concept of the newness became a Trojan horse of modernity until today. So the new Toyota, the new iPod, the new Nikes, newness and invention, and that is the era of change, promoting changes. But all those changes and all this kind of apparent heterogeneity is framed in the kind of epistemic universality. And that epistemic universality, of course, is a Christian invention of the Middle Age, the translation of cosmos into the universe, but also the invention of the University of Bologna, Salamanca, Paris, etc., etc. So the universality is the big frame that make us believe that what the narrative said is what the world is. Not just the social work, history, epistemology, etc., but also physics. I mean, with Galileo and Copernicus, etc., enter into the scene. So we began to believe that the universe is really what the emerging physical science and astronomy tell us that is as it is. So the point here is that the era of change is framed in a concept of universality, and all the discipline are embedded in that university. And by discipline, I mean theology and the trivium and the quadrivium in the Renaissance, but also all the kind of discipline that Kant articulated in the context of the faculty, and then Foucault kind of unfolded in the Le Mots et les choses, etc., etc. So that's a kind of the era of changes within Western concept of universality. But the Western concept of universality went together with the geopolitical organization of the planet in what we can call it unipolarity. And that unipolarity, of course, France and Spain and England, and they fought, and so they kill each other. And Westphalia was a moment of kind of coming to some kind of common sense and the invention of nation state that still we are living on today. But the question is that geopolitical order was constituted and narrated by Europe. So the expansion, the Western expansion, the Westernization of the world is that moment of unipolarity in international relations or interstate relations dominated by Europe. So this was the Eurocenter era of the, just not European, because in the 20th century, United States began to enter into the scenario. And after World War II, the Euro Center became North Atlantic Center. So this is the era 1500 of the era of hegemony or dominance and dominance in knowledge, politics, economy, subjectivities. So the newness and the post were, and sometimes still today, the two key modifiers to account and promote changes. Now, what I want to say is that since 2000, it seems that there are a lot of signs that the era of changes and the newness and the post is closing. And what we are experiencing now in the planet, so in the planet, is a change of era. It's a change of era, and then I think it's important to think about research. Not only what kind of research, but what are the presuppositions that we are going to kind of implement in the research we do if we accept that we are living in a change of era. So one of the signs of the change of era is that the unipolarity of the world order is apparently finishing. And we have already experiencing the emergence of multipolarity. There is a lot of discussion about multipolarity, but I mean, we don't have time to go into that. I would say that that the way I understand multipolarity is the moment in which de-Westernization began to enter into the scene. And the signs of de-Westernization are several, but I mention a few of them. One of them is that already remarkable by the first part of the 21st century is when China and Russia began to kind of oppose the Western decision proposed in the Security Council. The second moment was the BRICS. Now the BRICS have been debilitated a little bit because of the judicial coup in Brazil and conflict in South Africa, but China and Russia remain kind of working together apparently after the break. The Belt and Road Initiative seems to be another strong sign of multipolarity, all the kind of the consequences they have and they have this the Belt and Road. India has been a kind of ambiguous, of course, an important player in the BRICS, a little bit of ambiguous between looking toward China, Russia, or United States. But lately, apparently, the abstention of India in the situation of Ukraine, and the long-standing relationship between India and Russia are other signs that that the multipolarity is on the making. So Ukraine is a key point, it's a turning point at this moment in the conflict between de-Westernization, which is the reform, and re-Westernization, which is the counter-revolution, to contain Africa, to contain China and Russia mainly, but also Iran. So why Ukraine is crucial here? Because I think that the invasion of Ukraine was a moment in which negotiations were no longer possible, and rewesternization, the global design, the global design that began to be articulated with neoliberalism to homogenize the planet kept on going. So the expansion of NATO toward the east is, in my view, still a move of this kind of global design, a neoliberal global design. And the question why is this crucial is because I don't know what the outcome will be of this, but if NATO and European Union and United States prevail and keep on kind of consolidating their military bases and apparently their kind of biological investigation bases in Ukraine, it may be that the possibility of maintaining unipolarity is still alive. But on the other hand, the way that China and Russia, Russia and China are working on this, it seems that multipolarity may not be stopped as easily. In any way, this is a kind of the crucial point of the movement toward multipolarity that we have been seeing for the past 10 or 15 years. So what is at stake here is both what I would call in the colonial, the epistemic, ontological, colonial, and imperial differences. I will talk more about the colonial difference in a minute, but I want to just underscore the imperial difference. What we see between Europe and the NATO and Russia and China and Iran in a lesser degree is a conflict between solid, strong states in the general term of not the nation state, but state organization that have not been colonized by certain colonialism. Russia and China have not been colonized by certain colonialism like India or like South America or like Africa. And that kind of created a different kind of tension that they kind of, I try to describe as a kind of the imperial difference. The imperial difference has to do somehow with racialization also, but I don't want, I will not enter into that. So I think that the geopolitics, the investigation that we have to do today has to take account into how this, how the geopolitical organization, it seems that, yeah, the geopolitical order is changing, how this is affecting, impinging on our own research. So I connect the imperial difference with the conflicts between unipolarity and multipolarity. The narrative to justify unipolarity, or what Kissinger will say, the war order needs a leader, and he recognized that there is there is a lot of problems, but the only country that can be a leader for Kissinger in his book, The War Order, 2015, more or less, is United States. So that is a macro narrative, but it's also the politics of maintaining unipolarity. While the multipolarity needs a different kind of narrative. And so that we can go back to the map of China the map between China and the memory of China in the kind of nested rectangle. We know that today, we know the position of the state. The position of the state is dialogue, is resolve things by dialogue. But at the same time, there is a tradition here that goes to Hu Jintao, and it's also a connection with research that are doing philosophers and politologists in China, who are basing their kind of conception of the world order in Tianxia, or all under heaven. And they are developing this not just to kind of go back to kind of live as a pre-Confucius era, but what is kind of what a world order based on Tianxia instead of based on Westphalia and the nation state can contribute to deal with the planetary challenge, geopolitical planetary challenges of our time. So they are very clear. There are differences between political scientists and philosophers, but they are very clear in that the world order of the future can no longer be based on Westphalia and the nation state. So they are proposing that as no, not as a new universal world order to replace Westphalia, because that will be a kind of contradiction with their own kind of argument. But that is a question of the dialogue. If we have two models of the world order, what we will have to negotiate. We will have to kind of deal with that. So for China, Chinese at this moment is very important, this kind of research. I know that it doesn't have to do with Africa, but I think, or Latin America, but I think it's very important to us today. But this, what I just said until today and until now, is happening at the level of at the interstate level. And so organic intellectual like Kissinger or Xiao Tian in China are invested in this kind of research. But in my case, and the majority, many of us, I think, if not all of us, don't have the possibility at this point of intervening in the kind of the conversation of the Security Council, the G7, the G20, the G77, etc. So de-Westernization, the search toward de-Westernization and multipolarity are being played at the level of interstates. While what I call the decolonial investigation is at the level of what I will call the, after Partha Chatterjee, the political society. And the political society is all of us in different roles, different positions, different situations, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, in the United States, etc., that are part of the civil society in the liberal organization of the state market civil society. But we are no longer civil in that sense because we are not satisfied with the civility of the civil society. So that's part of, for me, what kind of motivates what I call decolonial investigation. And on the other hand, we are part of the political society of the civil society, but then there is the rest of the population. And the rest of the population is very mixed and confused, but has to do also with mainly with racialization, with refugees, with immigrants. So the people who do not belong to the civil society and do not have energy and time to devote to research because all the energy are devoted to survival. So I want to say that to kind of say the colonial investigation on the politics and ethics of the colonial investigation, for me, is part of the was one activity of the political society, but the political society is not limited to the university and to the kind of research we do. The Zapatistas are part of the political society, the peasant way are part of the political society, the women in Rojava are part of the political society, etc., etc. So for me now, and I have 2 or 3 minutes, and I am doing it on time, is that the task, two major tasks of the politics and ethics of the colonial investigation is to the gnosiological reconstitution of epistemology. What I mean by that, and I follow Mudimbe here, the invention of Africa, when he said, well, I cannot talk about the philosophy of the wisdom uh, in Africa before the intervention of the West and the kind of both imposition and acceptation, imposition from the European and acceptation from the part of African of philosophy. So he wisely introduced the concept of gnosis. And gnosis, I understand it, that we all know the Greeks divided doxa from episteme. Doxa was opinion, episteme was what we call science today, or rational knowledge. Well, doxa, I understand doxa include uh, uh, a doxa. Gnosis include doxa and episteme, or episteme and doxa are two dimensions of gnosis. So by moving into the gnosiological reconstitution epistemology, we reduce epistemology to its own well-deserved dimension and pretension of universality. But it's a universality that is local. It's a universality that is believed by the local people who believe in that universality. And together with the reconstitution of epistemology is the aesthetic reconstitution of aesthetic. And I mention those two because epistemology regulates knowledge, and aesthetic regulates sensibility. And we have to get out of this. And I know that in Africa, there's also not only a tremendous energy being devoted to what I will call gnosiological reconstitution, but also aesthetic reconstitution. I mean, in Senegal, you have the Biennale of Senegal, but there's a lot of things, artists and curators in Africa that are kind of moving no longer to kind of a new version of aesthetic, but I understand as a kind of aesthesis. Neo Muyanga for me is one of the example of this kind of getting out of the aesthetic, but moving into a kind of other dimension of a thesis. And a thesis is not longer limited to what in the West is called art, but the thesis is everything we do. And that is why at the beginning I talk about Homo sentiens sapiens. So Homo sapiens was an invention of the West because of the priority of the brain playing down the senses. And that happened mainly with Christian theology, but also in the 18th century. So that I think is, there are, on the one hand, and I finish here, on the one hand, we have a tremendous kind of geopolitical tension today that is changing the world order, moving to what seems to be an era of change and multipolarity, kind of closing unipolarity, and on the other hand, into pluriversality, which is closing universality. And pluriversality is related to the colonial investigation, but of course doesn't have to be This is not universal. So pluriversality is come out of the gnosiological reconstitution of universal epistemology and the aesthetic reconstitution of universal aesthetic. Uh, so let me just finish very briefly, 1 minute, with two big challenges beyond the geopolitical. One is we all know that in October of 2019, 2 months before China declared in Wuhan the pandemic, the COVID, was this kind of meeting. So we don't know now if the meeting was a prevention or was an announcement. And that is one of the challenge with all the consequence that this may have. And the other is the transhumanism. The transhumanism, if the transhumanists remain as a kind of science fiction of Silicon Valley and people like Harari, that is okay. That is a kind of very interesting, it's very fascinating, it's very entertaining. But if the transhuman already get into Davos, if the transhuman from Davos moves to the States and move more seriously to corporations that began to rule politics, that will be really a major challenge of the transhumanism, the kind of the moment in which immortality is achieved because the human brain and the machine become one. That deserves a long seminar, and I stop here, and I thank you very much for your attention.